Watching this series premiere reaffirmed two things that I already knew to be true. One, Pedro Pascal is a fucking perfect man. And two, grandmas be creepy. Hello interwebs, I am very excited to be here to review the series premiere of the video game adaptation of The Last of Us. This episode titled When in the darkness look for the light? I didn't check the title. It was something along those lines. Whatever the Fireflies say. We're off to a strong start here. But regardless of the episode title, yes, I am super pumped to be talking about this show. I have been really looking forward to it, as well as I think many of us have, especially since we saw the Rotten Tomatoes score that came out a few days ago. But I was trying to temper my expectations going into this, being like, I know it's probably solid, but, you know, Rotten Tomatoes is a very binary scored system. It's just like, people say it's good, people say it's bad. And so I didn't want to get my hopes up too much and thought, like, maybe it'll be fine. But wow, was this a truly fantastic series premiere. But before I get into that, I kind of feel like I need to talk a little bit about why I was so excited for this show, because I kind of have a lot of thoughts about the game and the discourse around the game and my history with the game that are going to inform my viewing experience with this show, not the least of which being that I played the game and this show is following that. So I'm going to let you know right up front, I'm not going to spoil things that we have not seen in the show yet if you have not played the game, so don't worry on that front. I'll make like maybe like a mentions of like, oh, I know it's coming or something like that, some things like along those lines, but I won't be spoiling anything. But I do feel like I need to talk a little bit about my relationship and thoughts on the game, because I think it'll kind of inform my perspective on the show as we get into the reviews. So the first reason that I was excited for the show is because I played The Last of Us way back when it first came out, which means I'm old now. I played it back in college on my big honkin' PlayStation 3, and I thought it was a truly fantastic story. The acting was wonderful and deeply nuanced, one of the like sort of best motion capture performances I'd ever seen at that time, let alone in video games, and it really brought a lot of weight to its story that I thought was deeply impressive. But then also being said, it wasn't like the first video game that I thought had an amazing story to it. I thought it was a really excellent experience, but it also sort of has led me to be kind of a little bit not annoyed, but sort of like side-eyeing the discourse surrounding the show from some of the writers on the series. Craig Mazin, I believe, was the person who said it, and I'll talk about him in a second because I love Craig Mazin. So this isn't a knock against him necessarily, but there's this discourse that I understand why they're trying to hype up the show and everything, but this sort of thing, like The Last of Us was the best story in video games, and don't get me wrong, it was fantastic. But I do kind of find that interesting as a discourse because, number one, I do think that there were many excellent video game stories before Last of Us and after it. Been excellent stories on their own. So this discourse as it being the best video game story of all time, I thought is diminutive to video games as a whole, and a lot of great games specifically that are before and after The Last of Us. But also, too, it is interesting to, and I won't litigate this all here, but The Last of Us is a game that feels like it really more wanted to be a television show. And this is not a knock against the game. I love it. I enjoy playing it. I enjoyed watching it very clearly. I'm a big fan of it. But it is a game that I think is almost better fit for its story to be a television show because it is so cinematic. And there are gameplay elements of it, and the gameplay is great, but the story is told on the back of cinema. Whereas there are other games that take fuller advantage of the video game medium, like Dark Souls, for example, that I don't think you could ever tell in any other medium. Whereas Last of Us is a story that I think might even be better told in television, or at least could be very similar, as we can clearly see by this adaptation with the TV show. And just to sort of tie these two thoughts and threads together, it has just been interesting to me to hear this discourse around The Last of Us being the best story in gaming, with my sort of feeling that The Last of Us is so cinematic in its presentation versus being grounded in gaming storytelling to tell its story, because it just shows me that I don't think we as a culture truly still really value video game storytelling on the whole. Like, don't get me wrong, within the video game community, we understand that games like Dark Souls and Elden Ring or Celeste or Hades, games that I think could only tell their stories through games, we understand that those things are really unique and take full advantage of the video game medium. But in terms of society writ large, the mainstream, things like The Last of Us get centered as like the best story in gaming because they are so cinematic. And that's not to say that The Last of Us is a bad story or a bad game, but I do think that it is more cinematic and therefore valued more by mainstream culture because we don't value video game storytelling as much. We don't see it as culturally high-minded, to put it in a very, articulate terms. But anyways, it was just something I was thinking about around the discourse of this game that sort of had me thinking about this going into the show. So, in a weird way, without going into the video game and sort of like what it means to be a video game and all that stuff, because that's a whole other conversation, it led me to be very excited for this show because it was very clear that this adaptation could be a very easy transplant to it. But also, I won't spoil, but there are critiques that I have looking back on the game from a more understanding perspective as someone who's like done analysis and things like that. That I'm like, oh, these could be improved, and I'm very excited to see if the show will improve upon aspects, fix aspects, change aspects, just to do something interesting or new with the story to surprise people. I think there's a really cool opportunity to build upon all of that. And then on top of that too, like I mentioned before, Craig Mazin is a writer that I'm really excited by whenever I see his name, because of him having written Chernobyl. Don't look at what he did before Chernobyl. It's a different story with him. But Chernobyl, I thought, was my favorite show of, I think, 2020, 2019, whenever it came out. But that show was phenomenal. If you have not seen it, go watch Chernobyl. It is really good. Definitely a top 20 TV show of all time for me, maybe even a top 10. So all of that really had me pumped to come into the show. And also, we have Pedro Pascal. What more do you need from things? So I figured I just needed to say all that before we get into the show proper, because I feel like it's going to, my feelings on the game and how it fits as a video game versus a TV show, and sort of the cinematic nature of video games versus like other things to do with video games, I think are going to weirdly make me more excited for the show, though it has a different discourse about the game. And that's not knocking the game, just saying it's built cinematically, not video gamey at certain points. Anywho, let's get to actually talking about the show. Enough about me talking about video games. This was a fantastic series premiere. I will do a spoiler-free section for episodes going forward in terms of like not spoiling the episode if you hadn't seen it already. But for this review, I'm going to talk just fully about the episode, but nothing about what happens after this episode in the game. So just know this going in, I'm talking full spoilers. This was great. Pedro Pascal, fantastic as always. He's a perfect dad character, whether he is a little baby Yoda or Ellie. He's always great. Bella Ramsey, who, by the way, came out as, I believe, non-binary just a little while ago. So using they, them pronouns, just in case you want to know that for the comment section. But they are phenomenal as Ellie. We also had Nico Parker as well as Sarah, who nailed it and did everything that she needed to do with the character. And Anna Torv, my Fringe, as a Fringe fan, I was so excited to see Anna Torv. I'm sure she's done other things, but I haven't really seen her in much since Fringe, so it was really nice to see her, and she is so good as Tess. I was like, oh, yes, I am here for you, Anna Torv. I am here for you. So all the cast are fantastic. The look of the show was gorgeous. There are many times where they do literal one-for-one shots, are very close to from the game, and you see it and you're like, oh, that they looks just like it. But even beyond those moments where they're like just taken from the game, putting it in real life with really depth, like really just nailing that, they also make the whole world beyond just recreating shots feel real. It's not just a one-for-one, but it really feels like this world. But the storytelling, I think, building upon what was in The Last of Us. And I say building upon, not just like just doing its own, like I feel like this evolves a lot of some of the stuff that's in there. So with all of that, I think this is an excellent series premiere. And this is going to be a long review. Strap in everybody, because I got a lot of things to talk about. And it was an hour and a half long episode. But there's just things that I want to talk about, because this is exciting. And honestly, I don't expect this video review to do super well in the algorithm, because of course, all the other reviewers got to talk about it, and everyone else's review has been out for weeks now. So I'm doing this for me, and for those of you who really hear me talk about things that I'm excited about. So if it's a long review, so be it. Fuck the algorithm. Who cares? Shouldn't say the F word. I was gonna say it again, but YouTube's being stupid. So let's just chill and talk about this. And I'm just gonna go through my notes because I loved it. I liked the opening sort of, it was very expositional, the like 1960s TV show. It was very overt of like, this is exposition. It was probably the most like, structurally wonky thing that they did in the entire show to start it that way. But I did like it because maybe it's a bit on the nose, but I kind of enjoyed that they really kind of made it clear the ties that they were trying to make with the show, while also explaining like what cordyceps, the fungus that sort of creates the zombies that we have here, the clickers and everything in this opening segment. Because what they did is they made clear allusions to pandemics. So it's like, oh, it's supposed to be like that. Climate change possibly being a cause of the fungus mutating to be able to get into humans. So just really connecting it to like, yeah, we caused this. And it's sort of not a one-for-one, but sort of a feel about those sort of big global disasters, and relating it to it is sort of like an overriding theme of the show, of what we've been experiencing, climate change and big disasters and things like that. Like what this show is sort of about, like maybe us in 20 years from now, considering what's going on with climate change. So it was a bit overt, but it was a solid way to start, and a good way to sort of create tension for people who hadn't played the games, don't know the like basic concept of the show. I adored that they kept the opening title sequence, the music, they kept even the composer from the game, but the music is literally the same theme song from the game. So I really like that, and the visuals are gorgeous of like the infection of the fungus like spreading out as like the pandemic map, was really beautiful in a disgusting way. It's like had that like gross but pretty vibe to it. That's a really hard thing to nail, and it really looked good. And music, if you played the game, you already knew it was going to be amazing when you heard that they kept the same composer, because it is really good. We then start off in 2003. I was curious when they were going to change the timeline or not. They really leaned hard into the 2003 of it all. Like we got like George Bush Jr. photos and everything. I was like, oh great, it's definitely 2003. As someone who was also in school in 2003, I was like, yep. Yeah, that feels about right, having his head there. But we meet Sarah, who I already said was fantastically played, but they really nailed her characterization. Not that Sarah and this is where I talk about like building upon the game. Sarah in the game was interesting. You know, they did a lot with the very little time that we had with her. But in the show, they really built her out even more to like showcase how smart she is, how clever she is, which then, as we see towards the end of the episode, is something that Ellie is also as well, sort of making these subtle connections between Ellie and Sarah in a way that wasn't as clear with the game. It's still there, but there's those subtle underlying like similarities between the two characters that aren't immediately obvious that I thought were really, really great. So Sarah just being smart, picking up stuff, things like that, but being really caring of Joel, all really great. We also have the great tension building of behind the scenes, seeing the pandemic, the virus or fungus, excuse me, getting into everybody. The grandma scene with her in the background, horrifying. Whenever things happen in the background shots, even though I know it's happening, they're always very tense. And it was great. You know, I've seen other movies that have done this similarly. The one that most immediately comes to mind, I believe, is Zack Snyder's, what is it, Dawn of the Dead, had a kind of similar opening to a degree. But this just knocks that out of water. I think this is one of the best, if not the best, like zombie outbreak openings that we've seen. And they built upon it so great, but also having great characterization for Tommy, for Joel, getting to see the relationship that's a bit contentious of like Joel being the protector with him, but Joel sort of like being a hard worker, not really paying attention to the people in his life. Not that he doesn't care, but he just like, he works hard, and sometimes to his own detriment and to his own caring and to his, you know, family relationships that, you know, Sarah understands, but others won't. So I thought that was great. And seeing once the pandemic, or I keep wanting to say pandemic, the outbreak starts, shots of in the car shooting the grandma, all of these things, the plane crashing were beautiful, and a lot of them 1-to-1 for the game. But I liked, again, Sarah having a little bit more agency, figuring things out instead of just being scared like she was in the game, giving the girl a little bit more thoughtfulness. Just, I thought, build out her characterization. But then when we get to the moment that I knew was coming, you know it's coming. But when it happens, it still hit me. Like, I played the game, and the moment was hard in the game. Troy Baker knocked it out of the park. But Pedro Pascal here, just like, both of them, too. Nico as well. Still hit me. Like, I was emotionally prepping myself watching it. I'm like, nope, I'm just going to cry. So all of that was truly great. Loved all of it. We then cut forward 20 years, which then seeing Silver Fox Pedro Pascal... I'm fine. It'll be okay. I'll be okay. Was not disliking the look, let's just say. But we jump ahead to Boston. It was interesting to start with this kid, mostly because I have guesses of where that's going. And it was a good explainer for, like, things have been normalized, like, you know, we live in a pandemic or fungus-controlled world now, but it has, like, there's literal, like, military control and signs on the wall. So, like, people understand that this is just a part of the world now. It's been very normalized. So that was an interesting, but I'm curious to see what this kid that, like, wanders into the quarantine zone and gets medicine goes, if that was just a way to, like, showcase what the quarantine zone is, or if that kid's going to come back at any point. Or was that the kid that Pedro threw in the fire? I'm not entirely sure. I'm curious to see where they're going with that, or if that was just an expositional thing, because it was a intriguing way to introduce us to this world, but one that had felt a little disjointed from everything else, even as a fan of the game. So curious to see where that's circling back around to, but worked as exposition as well. But then seeing Joel tossing this body in the fire, having no care, again, just seeing that he's very numb, very kind of dehumanized himself in a lot of ways after Sarah's death, was really rough to see, but effective. And that sort of runs throughout all of this episode. Is I love the writing of how visually and limited ways it gives exposition. There are moments where there are exposition dumps, where you kind of need to explain how the fungus works and things like that. But the way that they visually give exposition of, like, the signs on the wall, or for example, one of the characters, like, in the background was wearing, like, a Gore shirt from 2001, like the election season of then, showcasing just visually that, like, they don't really make t-shirts anymore. Like, all the t-shirts they have were from before the outbreak. So they're just using limited resources, and it was told that way. There's a lot of ways that the show's just visually or subtly conveys exposition that I thought was really evocative and very, very, very well done. So excellent on all of those levels. Just fully taking advantage of the cinematic technique building upon the game. And then we also start to see that Joel's a drug dealer. We also get to see the military dictatorship that's going on here. Again, sort of just natural everyday parts of life. Everyone's just sort of like, yeah, we deal with this. It's fine. People are getting executed. That's just how it goes in this world. So just how normalized that is. And then Joel being a drug dealer and selling things to people, again, showcasing his fall from, morality, I guess, that you saw even in the present day when he sort of, like, drove by those people saying, like, look, we have a kid, I'm going to protect her, and showcasing his protective instincts as a father, but also how he's willing to do morally dubious things in order to get by, and just you can just sort of extrapolate from point A to point Z where we're at now. And I thought that again just showcased that time slip really well, but showcased it made it feel consistent even with the limited amount of time that we got with Joel in 2003. Made us see the arc that we missed in those 20 years that got us to here. I thought that was great. But then we meet my goddess Anna Torv, Tess, in that meeting where she's just like, look, you beat me up, I will let it go. Just let me out of here because I want to go freaking home. Thought it was a great, like, I've never seen a scene like that negotiating with each other to, like, they both want to let her go. But, like, it was an interesting dynamic. That wasn't in the game, that I was like, this is very unique as, like, a scene setup. So that was just a clever little piece of, like, showcasing how badass Tess is, while also, like, having a unique spin on that sort of scene where she's not like, the guy wants to let her go too, even though she's the one he's kidnapped. Like, just showcasing how badass she is, how badass Joel is, to be able to have that weight of how much this guy's scared of both of them. I thought it was, like, just a clever scene and a clever twist on that type of scenario. We then meet Bella Ramsey, they're fantastic in this role. I just liked seeing Ellie being very, very pissed off and frustrated at her entire situation. And by the way, I'm going to assume Ellie uses she, her pronouns just based on the character from the game, but I'm differentiating that from Bella, who uses they, them pronouns. So just when I use she, her, I'm talking about Ellie. Just to be clear for all of you out there. We then also see a little bit more of Joel. He very clearly cares about Tommy, is worried where he is, which is an interesting twist from the game. I don't think this isn't really a spoiler for the future of the show or the game, really, to showcase that in the game we didn't know that Tommy was even still alive at the time of the time jump in the game. So the fact that we know this now, that he's at least alive now, and that's all I'll say. Is an interesting little change from the game. I just thought those were nice little changes there. But then we get to see that Joel again has been using drugs, alcohol, just again the slip into just numbing himself and just like needing these addictions to be able to just self-medicate. Pretty much his very clear PTSD and trauma that he's trying to numb. But I loved his relationship with Tess when she comes back, and she's just like, again, Tess. Oh, I love her so much. She's just like, I told him that you weren't going to hurt him, but I would very much like you to hurt him. I loved that, and I loved the setup of them going to get the car battery that they need to go and find Tommy. So just like good goals, stakes, it all builds up really well. I also forgot to mention the explosion that Tess survived earlier, and we get to see the totalitarian sort of military dictatorship state that we are under at the moment. So interesting to see that. I am curious, when something that they didn't do much in the game, but I'd be curious to see if they do in the show, but maybe not, is to give a little bit more personality to the military folks. We got a little bit of that with the guy that Joel was sort of seeing on the side is like doing his drug stuff with. But other than that, in the game, we don't have much of a military people. They're just like a force that you deal with in the game. So I'm curious to see if we'll get more characters for the military in the show. That'll be an interesting path of development to see a little bit more about than just the Fireflies. Speaking of which, Marlene, also great. I love her being like disillusioned with the rebellion, being like, we're losing, we're fighting for democracy, we've been doing it for 20 years. These people have won, they are way more powerful than us. Which is kind of sad to like see someone who I would probably politically align with if I was in this situation, I'd probably be on her side, be that disillusioned. But it makes sense. But her putting all of her eggs in the Ellie basket, as it were. And her scene with Ellie was also really great for two reasons. I love seeing like how confident Marlene is with Ellie, and the relationship that they have together, and Ellie sort of learning about how important she is, without, again, spoiling for anybody who hasn't seen, but that was interesting. We also got a reference to the character of Riley, which, again, no future spoilers, but I will just say I loved Bella's performance at that specific moment with the reference to Riley. And I'm very curious to see the adaptation of that character in this show. So I'll just leave it there for now. But that moment was one, as a game fan, I was like, that's a cool sort of bringing that up at this point in this story, because it wasn't in the game. Then I loved Tess and Joel sort of going on this quest to get the car battery and their cards back, the currency essentially, and getting to see how scary the situation is with the infection. I like that the show is not showing infected just yet, like full infected, but we're getting little hints and tension builds to it, like the quick like jump scare that we get in the darkness and seeing one on the wall. Very scary and beautiful looking in a weird way, really building the tension and build up to these creatures. Just so pumped to get to see when we get to some of them from the game. Just seeing them in live action, I'm sure will be awesome, just based on like the trailers and stuff. So that was awesome to see. I was super excited about that. But then also like the tension and fear of getting infected, really building that up. I'm curious to see if they'll use the game mechanic thing of like putting on the gas masks in those situations. So that'll be interesting. But just I like the little shots we get of like dust particles in the air at certain points in the episode to show like this infection could be anywhere. The fungus could be just in the air you breathe. So that was like, I just like, again, subtle visual storytelling that really built up the tension of these sequences. And then I loved them coming in after the fact to find Marlene being like, look, got shot. I'm bleeding out here. Will you take Ellie? And Joel, like, not even really caring about Ellie, just sort of like even having his gun on her, just showing how much he doesn't like see her as like a young girl, sees her as an enemy combatant, essentially. So that was really just showcasing a good starting point for his character, and Ellie being like, screw you. But then we get to the scene where, Joel and Ellie are sort of in a room together, and Ellie figures out the code for the music. That 70s and 60s music on the radio just means different things, and 80s music means trouble, that she's able to sort of figure out from sort of guessing Joel's reaction by saying like an 80s songs lyrics. That was really clever, and again, goes back to what I was saying before, that there's these subtle links between Ellie's intelligence and Sarah's that like wouldn't immediately be obvious as like these are two similar characters, but ones that I think tie them together in a really nice way. I thought was really just well done on that front, just to showcase their intelligence in similar ways. The call out of the watch too was a scene right from the game, but I love the symbol of the broken watch in it. It just works well to like there's a remembrance of Sarah. But the scene that I thought was one of my favorites was the scene where Ellie sort of is looking out side the quarantine zone, and she sort of says, I've never been out there. It's really dark. And she like asked Joel, like, you've been out there though. You know your way around there, so you can get there. And it was such a well-written moment because it was Ellie, this tough character who never lets anyone in, as we've seen so far, like always has a guard up. It's a moment where she's asking for comfort from a man that she does not know. She's scared, but will not let him see it, and yet wants reassurance that she's going to be okay. So it was well played, well written, of a moment of just allowing a character who is very tough, but is scared and doesn't want to show it. Very, very well written. I thought was a really cool moment of vulnerability through trying not to show it. I was really, honestly, that was probably one of my favorite moments of the dialogue of the episode. Just, I thought that was excellent, and Bella's performance was spot on. But then we get to the escape sequence, and this was almost very similar to the game. We even have the bus in the background, which is a set piece from the game, which I thought was fun. But then we run into the military dude from that Joel's friends with, and number one, I liked the tension of like him checking the back of their heads for infection, and Ellie trying to think of what to say here without spoiling too much. Ellie clearly not wanting that to happen and stabbing him. I thought that was well done in the moment, and we get to see that the thing that was scanning her did say that she was infected, but is that the case or not? We'll leave that on the table for those of you who have not played the game yet. So all of that was great, and then we clearly see that Joel has a little bit of PTSD, anger, violent trauma, still, just a little bit 20 years later, because he beats the crap out of that guy, because he was very similar situation to the man who killed his daughter. So that was just really tough moment to watch, and seeing how violent he is as a man at this point. Just thought that was great. Works well and makes sense for his character. But then we get the great little end tense moment where we hear 80s music on the radio, which we now know means trouble, as they head out into the city, and the gorgeous shot of the two towers leaning on each other was very striking, straight from the game. What an ending, what an episode. Very, very solid stuff. Just to wrap out my thoughts, like, if it's not clear, I really enjoyed this. I thought that this was, honestly, setting aside the gameplay elements, which I think are their own thing to discuss. In terms of the cinematics of the game versus the cinematics of the TV show, I think the show really built upon everything that the game did them visually stunningly, used the game as a great foundation to build more upon in ways that was really intriguing and thoughtful. And yet when the show did one for one the game, me as a fan was like, oh, that's so cool, but it had context. It wasn't just like, oh, we're doing the thing from the game. It wasn't like the big Easter egg moment. It was like, we're doing that thing that it felt like it fit the show in a way that if you'd never seen the game, you wouldn't know that they were literally recreating the shot. And you wouldn't, and in both ways, you're not missing anything other than that small little dopamine hit of like, oh, it's the thing from the game. I thought it was very subtly done, very nicely done. It worked really well. The performances across the board are fantastic, but I will give the MVP to Anna Torv for this episode because I loved her so much, but everyone was fantastic all the way down. Yeah, I'm very pumped to continue talking about the show as we go forward. Was not disappointed in the slightest. I am very curious to see how they're going to update some things from the game, whether or not they do. It comes later on in the game, so we'll talk about it when we get there. Yeah, this episode has me excited, and I will leave it there. Excellent premiere. What did you think, though? I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments, please, because help me on the algorithm, because this probably ain't doing well. But yeah, exciting first episode. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Beyond all of that, I will have more videos coming soon, both on this channel and my main channel. Don't forget to check me out on Nebula. Just to let you all know, I'm not telling the normies yet until my video going out on my main channel later on. But I'm going to be releasing a couple Nebula exclusive videos over on Nebula in the next few weeks. So if you go subscribe over there, you get some of those. Patreon will also get those videos as well and help me pay the bills. But beyond all of that, I hope you're all taking care of yourselves. I hope your new year is great. I think this is the first video I've recorded a couple videos since the new year. So it's not the first one, but I hope your new year's going great, everybody. I gotta wrap this out. Mwah. Take care. Live long and prosper. You dorks.